Hello. So good morning, and hope you have all had a coffee. So welcome to the tutorial building human-first and machine-friendly CLI applications. So my name is Reka. I work for Sorcery on various code quality and refactoring tools, also in the IDE and also in the command line. And I have been using command line applications for a very long time, and the first time when I started to also develop them from that side was at the previous fintech job where we created various internal tools, and that's where I also got to know this command line interface guidelines, which will be one of the major points of the discussion today. I would like to ask you, first of all, to install two tools which we will use for today's example. So one is Cookie Cutter and the second is Poetry. So that would be, so these will be necessary. And then the first thing I would like to mention is that the title says human first, which also implies that anytime any comment, suggestion, idea is very welcome, because because that should be something which we discuss, what is intuitive and what. So the first step, if you have the first question I would like to ask is, who is familiar with Cookie Cutter? Okay. Then let's perhaps start with a quick introduction to Cookie Cutter itself. So let's just go for. So Cookie Cutter is basically a tool for creating project templates, and that is exactly what we are going to do in the very first step of our in the very first step of our preparations. So the URL, what you see here, this Cookie Cutter lab, this is just a GitHub repository, and and what it contains is a Cookie Cutter JSON file, which defines various project properties, and then the other major part of it is this Cookie Cutter project name directory. And this is in Jinja syntax, and what will happen is that when we run this Cookie Cutter, then it will generate for us a project following that template. So the first I would like to start with omitting this this parameter for replay file, and see what happens if I just run Cookie Cutter. So Cookie Cutter, and then the URL of a repository containing a Cookie Cutter. So this can be a URL, or it can be also a local directory. And then what happens that it starts to ask me for various properties. For example, what's the name of my project? And if I said it's PyCon catalogue, then for the next property, it will already suggest a name based on that. And we could interactively fill in various fields. So if you saw the JSON file, there are like 10 different fields. We could just all fill them and create a project. So that's the basic usage, how you use Cookie Cutter most of the time. And what I would like to ask you to do instead now is to run this command, which is here. And here we pass this replay file option to the Cookie Cutter. And what will, oh, I'm sorry. Oh yes, so I should follow my own advice and see that this cookie cutter talk JSON. So this is here in the project skeleton directory. So please pass. This is a file here in this project skeleton directory. So if you run it somewhere else, then please adjust the path of it. And I'm sorry. So yes. So, and what now happens? Please tell me if it's working for you as well. Is that now we just generate a project based on that template, and now if we navigate to this PyCon catalog directory here, we can already see that we have now a Python, so we have generated a poetry command line project here. So as a first step, so have you got that far? First question. So that's a good point. So the command is here, and I would like to suggest to first of all clone this repository, this PyCon 2023, because that's the easiest way. So the repository is github.com Reka CLI tutorial PyCon 2023, and here it is important that you have this cookie cutter talk JSON file, and this is the command which we should run, and don't commit the same mistake which I did, that running the so adjust the path of this talk JSON, please.
PyCon catalog looks a little bit different. It looks like after I ran cookie cutter, it couldn't find poetry.
It couldn't find poetry, yes. Then do you have poetry installed?
I do, yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. Why it might be. What happens if you go navigate to the directory like here? Can you run poetry shell here?
I don't think I can run poetry directly because my company laptop is set up kind of weird. Like I can't run it globally. Is there a way I could run it manually to just do the same stuff that it did in that script?
Yes. So the script didn't do too much. All the it just did a poetry install. So and that's actually also a very good point, which we have just heard. So what? Sorry? Oh, okay. That's my mistake. So in that case, it means that you have already generated the project, but it doesn't run with. But it has it can't run. Is that correct? Sorry.
I'll do it on here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm having the same issue where it's like I have 3.9.
3.9. Okay. So So if you have Python 3.9, then I would like to ask you to go to this PyProject toml in the generated project, so in this PyCon catalog, to the PyProject toml, and here at line 11 we are setting the minimum Python version. And this is what should be changed, please. If it's not, so sorry, that's my mistake. That 310 was probably a bit too high to set this. So, have we got that far with whichever Python version? Oh, okay. What are the other problems with the setup?
Do you know how I can pass like a custom search path to Poetry?
A custom search path? Sorry, what do you mean?
Like for SSL certificates?
Ooh, I have to admit I have no idea. Okay, my suggestion would be to just carry on with some of the demonstrations here, and then in the first break we can perhaps troubleshoot some of the installation issues. I'm sorry if it turned out to be more complicated than I assumed. And what I would like to show around is this little bit what we have just generated in this application. So here we have we have a Python poetry application with a typer CLI. So I will just activate poetry shell first. So if you have managed to set up, please follow along. And then the first thing which we can see is this Python that there is this PyCon catalog script which we can run, and with the help we can see what kind of subcommands and things we have here. And we have one subcommand which is this talk, and here we can just install, so say poetry install, and then look around here a little bit in the generated project. So what? So here in the in this script, this is the first important setting. Here we defined that this PyCon catalog, this should run this app defined in the CLI app module, and the code for this can be found here. And I just need to set an interpreter, and here we can see the various so here we can see only this one version command that we saw, and then the real bulk of the application. This can be found here in this talk CLI module, and first, and here we will have various commands for creating, updating, deleting talks, and things like that. Okay. So So the next thing I wanted to show is this command line interface guidelines. So this is a site called CLI.dev, and I really recommend its reading, but it's a quite how to say a lot of material is there. And first of all, I wanted to ask your opinion about what do you think about what can be about this philosophy and principles which this mentions. So human first design and simple, what does that mean for you for a command line application? Yes? It has to be intuitive, yes. Sorry? Well documented, yes, that's a very good point. Consistent, okay. What does consistency? So where does consistency come from? What are the sources of consistency? One way to do things, yes, that's interesting. Okay, consistency is indeed one of the points which they mention. It use. What are the usages usually of a command line application? So in which settings is it used? Sorry? In the command, yeah? Mm-hmm. Humans who are familiar with computers, yes, that's actually a very interesting point, because that's, I think, one thing which CLI argues, that many of these applications are super intuitive if you are already familiar with this, and less approachable for beginners. So yes, that's exactly one of those points. And I would like to jump to this basics first. So the whole guide is structured in a way that there are, let's say, 4 things which they say should always be followed. And then there are other additional steps or additional recommendations which they say that, okay, it's nice to follow those, but these are the basics which we should always stick to. And here, use a command line argument parsing library where you can. This is exactly what we have done in our example. So if we go back here, so what we use here is typer in our project, and this is. And the one reason why, I'm sorry. So the one reason why the CLI suggests us to use a tool like typer or whatever library all the time is because that way a lot of the other recommendations which they have will be automatically there. And actually that's also the reason why I suggest not just using the Click and Typer or RParse are really all very fine tools, but also to use a cookie cutter, because that way a lot of the things are already pre-generated in a way which is practical for us, and we don't need to. So we don't need to add the same elements for many applications all the time. So this following using a command line parsing library, that's something which I really, even for the smallest and tiniest projects, I really recommend. So now I want to get back again to our brief exploration here. So we have looked at the help, and then we can also look at the help of the talk command. And one thing which I would like to point out that I haven't written, so that this code what we have here doesn't really contain any infrastructure for all this. So all the help text, for example, what you can see are coming from these doc strings, and that is all created by Typer. So that is one of the major reasons why I think that it's a cool idea to use such a library, because these things all just come without any additional need for setup or whatever. And then I just want to explore a little bit further. That, for example, we can also look at the help of this command, where we can see that, okay, you can create many, you can create a new talk, and these are the parameters which it gets. And if we look at it again, if we look at the edit, it has also very similar parameters, and that's where probably this consistency point comes into the picture. That we these things should really look quite similar. Okay. So as a next point, I would like to ask you to all, I have to give you to all of you who already have managed to set this up, to try to install a shell completion for this tool, which we already have. So let's say that we have 3 minutes for this exercise. So if you have already set this up and installed, please try to figure out how to install a shell completion for this. Yeah, feel free to discuss it. And sorry? How I get there? I generated this project with Cookie Cutter.
So I've got the PyCon catalog folder.
Oh, that it's main. Where is it coming from? That's an excellent question. So if everything went as planned, then this should come from the Cookie Cutter. So the post-generation script of the Cookie Cutter contains So here in this post-generation, we theoretically also created a Git repository. And if something went wrong, perhaps did the poetry part run correctly? So the poetry installation for you? Sorry?
I think so.
You think so? Okay. Yes? So if you are in the PyCon catalog directory, Now my mistake. So if you are in the PyCon catalog directory, can you see all the helps and this stuff there? Okay. And I just out of curiosity, is it a GitHub repository also? Do you know that? So if you run For this shell completion, okay, good question. So in one of those helps, theoretically the help should contain some instructions how to install shell completion. The help for the root command. PyCon catalog itself, yes. Okay, so I think that it's time to discuss this. So if we look at PyCon catalog dash help, then besides the version for which we saw the code here so this version, this is an option defined in our code, but there are two other options here as well. Install completion and show completion. And if everything goes as planned, then this install completion, this should install shell completion, and this will be very handy as you follow along and do some playing around. This will you will get the completion for all the commands. Sorry? That is coming from typer. So that is why we don't even have a code for it.
The way it works, it just sticks it into your shell.
Excellent question, the excellent point. That is the caveat, that this install completion works fine most of the time. And for example, I use Z shell, and there that didn't really, didn't work out of the box. But what I can do instead, there is also this show completion. And if I add it to my ZSHRC, then it actually works that's why it works for me. So the default way to install the shell completion is with -- install completion. And if that doesn't work, and you know that you are using a custom shell, then this is the second way how to try it, this show completion, and then append it to the So, has it been successful for? Okay, cool. Then I would like to explore this project a little bit more, and I would like to just show again these help texts which we have looked at. So there is a create help, there is an edit help, and I'm not sure whether you have noticed, but I made a mistake there. There are these various texts here. These contain the underscores, which probably isn't too nice. So I would like to ask you to, so the next exercise is please find the place where this is configured in the code and adjust the help text for all these various options. So 5 minutes, let's say, for this. Sorry?
I'm just wondering where to look. Talk.cli.py, would that be a good place to search?
Yes, that sounds like a good candidate. So. So in the meantime, if you have any questions or any still things with the setup, then please let me know. We can look at it. Yes.
I'm using Anaconda. I kept getting this with the install completion.
Oh.
Shell command is not supported. I guess I'm trying to troubleshooting online, but have you ever seen that before?
No, with Anaconda I don't know, but instead, if you know where your configuration file is similar to the ZSHRC, which I had, I don't know whether in your Anaconda shell you have something like that, then because instead install completion, try to invoke it with show completion.
Yeah, I'm not too sure how to do that.
Sorry?
I'm not too sure what you just said.
So here, but here where you said install completion, instead you say -- show completion.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the same. I tried that one. It's the same shell command.
Oh, okay.
Supported.
And if you run something else like PyCon catalogue -- help, what happens?
That's fine.
That's fine. Okay. Sorry, I am not that familiar with Anaconda, but cool. It's not that important. It's just convenient if you don't need to type that much. So, have you managed to update these names? Any ideas where to look for it and how to adjust those? Yes. The help text of?
Help text of each individual command.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me it's from line 20. You just adjust the help text to get rid of the discuss.
Okay, exactly. So at line 20, we have defined this short name option, and if I replace it with a space, then it is X. And here as well. Here perhaps it's better even that way. Yes? So, and if I now run this again, then of course it has been adjusted, so thanks. That's exactly the right answer. And here I want to point out one thing. So the main reason why I was showing this exercise is that if we look at this code in the talk CLI, we didn't really edit the command. So we didn't do anything with the add or the edit command. Instead, the trick what we are using here is that we have defined an option in the namespace of this talk CLI module, and then we can see that this short name option is actually what we reference both in the create and in the edit commands. And when I was showing this CLIG and asking about, hey, what are some nice properties of an application, and when somebody mentioned a very good point, consistency, I really want to point out this feature from and this possibility from Typer, that Typer options are under the hood, or not under the hood, actually they are Python objects, and you can define them and reuse them and say that, okay, I have two commands, edit and create, they are very closely related, so probably they should use the same options. And one great point about this is that it is, of course, less code duplication, but it also makes the application immediately more consistent. Any idea what is the biggest advantage of this? So besides having nice consistent help texts, what is another benefit of this of sharing options? So, sorry, perhaps the question was phrased in the wrong way. So what we have just seen is that because we share this option, so we define the short name option here, and then both create and edit just reference it. And this helped us with the help text, that it is nice and consistent and it needs to be edited only once. My opinion is that the help text is the smaller benefit, and there is an even bigger one. Sorry, a bit louder.
One central place to make edits if you need to make changes to the code rather than several changes.
So thanks a lot for this very good point. So yeah, exactly, there is one central place to make edits instead of needing to update multiple things, and very easy to oversee them, unfortunately. And what I would like to point out that this is true not only for the help text, which we have just edited, but just as much also for the option name itself. So if I am just defining the options here in the command itself, then it could anytime happen that in one place I say, let's say short name, and in the other one I write it as one word, and then the next one it is just called name or whatever. So it could easily happen if we define all of them separately that even the option name isn't consistent, and this having them defined at one place, this is exactly how. So this is one good technique for making them the same everywhere. My next question is that there are some other. So here at the beginning of the file, I have defined only short name and short name duration, and so these properties related to the various fields. And I would like, but if we look at the help, there are some other options. So this plain and JSON, with which we are going to play then in the next session. And where are these coming from? So where does the create command get those last three options from? Yes, exactly. And for this application, this is a small overkill because we have actually most of our logic is in this talk CLI. But generally, I think it's a very good pattern to say that okay, we have the common options which contains things which are actually these options you could have in any kind of command line application. It isn't specific for anything. And then in the talk CLI, we define the options which are really talk specific, like the duration of a talk and YouTube video ID and stuff like that. So, actually this is also one of the reasons why I started with Cookie-Cutter. One thing is that I really recommend this. So this should be perhaps one of the, this is supposed to be one of the main lessons of this workshop, that consistency is very valuable, and one really good tool to achieve it is using the template like Cookie-Cutter. And the second thing is, which we can really nicely observe, I think, if we use such a template, that a lot of the stuff which we have here is actually very, very common and can be used in many different domains. And then the things which are really specific for talks and PyCon and this application, these so we can focus on them much more if we use a template like Cookie-Cutter. So so yes, this is where our options came from. So some of them are defined here in the common options, and the talk specifics here in the talk CLI. And then one thing I would like to suggest before the break and before we are starting to actually add data to this application, and we did that right now. So the application will use a SQLite database as a storage, and we should set up our development environment, a separate development database. So again, this is an exercise. So please, in the next 2-3 minutes, look around in that project and try to figure out how to set up, how to configure a development database. For that exercise, it's not. So this should be found somewhere in the internal documentation of the project, and this should be a test whether the intuitive part, which was mentioned by one audience member, how much it fulfills this requirement. Yes, so config.py is so there was one very good comment that config.py is something very relevant for this, indeed.
Would a reasonable approach to define another
So there was a question whether it's a good approach to define a second database for development database. This has some drawbacks because we want to use this DB path and this database the very same way in development and production environment, but it needs to talk to another database. That is what we want to achieve. And then there is a third environment, which we probably should keep in mind, and this is test. And the way how I recommend to do it is here described in the README, that if we look at this config, it uses pydantic. So it uses the settings class from pydantic to define to define the path of this database. And pydantic has and this setting has this possibility to refer to an environment variable with this env optional parameter. So the way to set up the development databases, which I recommend, is to change the value of this environment variable, Python catalog db path. And this is what is also described in this generated README, that before we add and manipulate any data, we set this. And for a workshop like this, it is not such an important thing to do, because otherwise we would write into this default database, okay, not such a big problem. This step is, I think, very important if you are developing a command line application for own usage. Like, let's say you would have a similar thing, but not for PyCon talks, but for your books. And in the first version, perhaps you develop something and have a kind of working version, which you start to use on a day-to-day basis, and then afterwards you start adding new features, experimenting, and then it's very easy to mix it up. That okay, that's a point where it's very useful to distinguish between development and so to say production environment, and and so that's why I recommend this adding as a next step. And then, if we consider there is a third very important environment, and this is the test environment. And of course, when I go here and run these 20 tests, I don't want them to put any data into my real database. And for that, we can use a PyText fixture. Who is familiar with PyText fixtures? Okay, so then I am not going to discuss that in great length, but for this kind of SQLite storage, this is probably the easiest way to have a fixture with an auto use, and then we have set up our test environment. Okay. And now that we have seen a little bit around in our application, I will just commit the changes with the update help text, and then I would suggest that before we add some data and play around with this a bit more, let's have a 15-minute break. And if you have any questions regarding the setup or whatever, then please come to me in the break, and we'll try to figure it out. I think that so far we have mainly just looked around. So if you want to catch up, the important, and if you got stuck somewhere, the important step is really this. to generate the project. And the second thing which I would suggest is that I will just upload the repository as it is now in my environment, and then if you have difficulties with the cookie cutter or whatever setup, you can clone the repository directly and then use that instead of trying to generate it.
Yeah, I was able to get it running, but I just had to make a few changes to the code so it worked with 3.9.
Oh, okay. That's
Just like a few.
okay. What were those changes?
Do you want me to just show you?
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, just like in this. Oops.
Okay. So we are having a break, and we will continue at 10:10, please.
There were just like a couple.
So, should we continue? So thanks a lot for the good questions in the break. So here you can find this repository with the current code. I did so if if the code generation with Quickcutter didn't work correctly for whichever reason, then this is a way to. So this is a possibility to just clone this repository and continue working with that version. And then there was another great question about this resource which we have discussed here, this CLI G site. I have added a link to this as well. So what I would like us to do next is to explore a little bit this create command which we have. And I would like, so the first exercise would be to add some talks to this repository and discover what are the various possibilities of adding this. So like, let's just say take 3 minutes and try to use the create command and add some talks and see how that command works.
PyCon catalogue create.
Good question. The question was whether it should be PyCon catalog create. Well, I would suggest that it's talk create, yes, and I'm just. Catalog. So let's just look here, and if we look at that, that helps. So hopefully that would be the discover. And I definitely added the wrong version.
program that can be code commanded pointed at the JSON document.
Hmm. So, questions. What are the various ways of adding a command? What can we do with this command? Exactly. That was a great way of summarizing it. You can pass in flags. So, for example, let's just add. So, if I don't do anything, let's start with that way. That if I don't do anything, I just call the command as it is. Then it will ask me for some input, and I want to point out that we can even skip some of those, like the video ID, and I will just pick one from the schedule IC, or short name. Let's say it's Python syntactic sugar. Then speaker name is, and the title is and we don't know how long it will take because this talk will be only on Saturday, and then let's just do this, and we have created and exactly how thank you, you pointed it out. Another way of creating talks is that instead of passing in interactively, we can pass in options, and say, for example, there is another talk on Saturday which is called Python linters, or Python linters at scale. And if I just pass in this it also created a talk for us. Why does it make sense? So what's the reason? Why did we choose this setup for? So these two possibilities. Yes, you can automate. That is a very, very important point. And this is actually where, so if I organize this workshop in a more theoretical way, that would be probably the very, very first thing which I would point it out, which is also in the title of this this session, that human-friendly and machine-friendly applications. And this interactivity is one of the major patterns which I would like you to have as a takeaway from this session. And it is actually, again, I get back to this command line interface guidelines, which I would like to point out. This is this is an open source guideline. It has been written by a community, so I'm just keep on referencing it because I think it's great, but it's not. So it's generally a good resource and not specific to this workshop. And here there are various principles around conversation as the norm. For example, that even if some required parameter is missing, it's a good idea to prompt for it, assuming that it's a human using it, and also this interactivity point. And this is exactly what we are going to discover a bit now in the code. And my question is, any ideas where this related part can be found in the code. So where should I go? So if we look in this talk CLI, here, for example, both for the create and for the and then also for several other commands, we also have defined an option, this interactive flag. It also comes from those common options which we have discussed. So from this way, and it is by default true, and this regulates whether this kind of prompts are shown. So for example, if I get back now, and so if I just say talk create, and then I will be prompted for various various properties. Instead, if I say talk create no input, then suddenly I get an error. Or also if I say talk create no interactive. So here we can see that these are, so this is also a nice functionality font typer, that we can define multiple synonyms for one option. And this helps with the consistency in the sense that there are unfortunately several things where there is no real standard terminology for it, and multiple people may find something as intuitive. So this is a good way to provide multiple options. And one important idea behind this is that we can have multiple ways how we call these scripts. So one very obvious way is to some human sitting there and typing stuff. Then there is another possibility that we want to use it in a string of scripts, and in that case, of course, we don't provide we don't want to provide prompts. Instead, we want to rely on options being passed and everything working automatically. This is for that a very common use case is continuous integration systems, for example, where this happens. I'm sorry. So yeah, and then I want to emphasize this. So this is coming from the Python standard library. Sys standard input is whether it's a terminal, and if it's not, then we don't even look at the interactive flag. We just assume that okay, we can't expect a human to provide an input. And I want to just get back to the code of this create command.
So if you were to call this from a script that is a CLI thing would be false?
If you pipe something into the stand input, then it will be false. So if you call it from a script, I would suggest to add, and you don't want to get prompts, then add the no interactive or no input flags. And here, if we now look at the code a bit, then we can see that first we try to figure out whether any fields have been provided in the first place. So for this, we use this get field values function. And again, I want to point out a very an important feature from typer for this, and this is this context. So if we just go back there, you can see that the first argument of this create function is a typer context, and this contains, among others, all the arguments and options that have been passed. And this is what we use in this get field values method, where where we look at the so we get the options from the context. And here is the important distinction, that if we are not in an interactive mode, then we just exit with an error. And if otherwise, if we are in interactive mode, then we ask the user for further fields. And in order to do that, we use this prompt from this is coming from the library Reach. And this gives us a convenient way to store all the various field names that are provided. And it's that. Okay. My next question about this is that here we got some error. What are the important ways to distinguish an error from a successful outcome? So how can we see whether a command has been successful? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
The colors of the prompt.
The colors of the prompt, yes, that's a very good point.
Is that your exit code?
The exit code, yes, that's also. Standard error, yes, exactly. That's what those were exactly the answers I was looking for, and I would like to switch back to these basics, where last time we mentioned that we have already followed the very first basic guideline by using typer, and these are the other so-called basics which we should really follow even in the very small and not frequently used command line scripts. These are these two things. So the first is to return 0 exit code on success, non-zero on failure. And then the second one is that distinguishing between the different types of output, so standard out and standard error. And yes?
Suggested mapping of non-zero exit codes to failure mode? Or does the guideline leave that open to the developer to choose one? How do you want to map the last?
Map the non-zero exit codes to the most important failure modes. Yes, that's a good. That's a great question. As far as I remember, the guideline doesn't contain further suggestions. And I have to admit that in this regard, this cookie cutter we are working at is also a bit lazy, because anytime there is an error, I think it returns 1. But I would say that again, it depends on the use case, but the very general guideline, which we can say for any kind of command line application, whatever, that 0 on exit, 0 on success, non-zero on any kind of failure, and then what types of failure exist and how to group them and what is a meaningful coding for them. There it's more difficult to give some general advice, because it very much depends on what your application is doing. And what I would like to point out here, how this happens in the code. So for example, if we didn't receive any input and we are in not interactive mode, then we call this exit, so we raise this exit with error function. And here come the two other points, which thanks the two other people mentioned. So one is that we write to the standard error. And then the second is that we use this red color, which is of course optional, but I think that it is a really nice feature from Rich, and usually whatever we whatever we print with the Rich interface, we can always provide some styling. I'm usually very careful with it, and one caveat is that especially if the application is intended for many users, they might use many different terminals with various settings. So, with the, but this having some red, for example, for error, that is a good standard, so to say. And then we also return the typer exit, and here is the important part that this code has by default the value 1 and so not a 0 value. And this is one thing I have to admit that for a while it was for me difficult to remember that, okay, what is success, what is fail, what is the, why is 0 so like 0 like nothing, it means success. It was a bit unintuitive for me for a while. And then, yes? Exactly. That was when when I remembered it. That for failure we have many different ways how that can happen. And talking about success and failure, the next thing I would like to check out is our tests. And here, for example, for this create command, we have some basic test where we run only so we provide only the short name, and then we check the two important things to check, that the exit code is 0, and we only check that there is something in the standard out. And yes? Yes, that's a good question. I don't know. Now we have tried out multiple people. So if has anybody seen something strange instead of the emoji after creating a talk? So I mean, it's absolutely not a non-representative sample. I agree with you that it is. It depends very much on the intended audience of the tool whether you want to add it. I think that often it's nice and often it's more concise way of explaining something. Well, in that case, it's just a decoration. But for example, if something was successful, then having a checkmark emoji is often more informative than adding something like done or whatever text, so you can see the rim better. But I absolutely agree that that it is not always a good idea. And my next question is that if we look at the output of create again, I just scroll this up a bit for a successful create actually, we can see that, so now we can see that there is this new talk created text and then some other stuff. And this new talk created is in the standard error and the other stuff is in the standard out. And my question is again, why? Exactly, that's the point, that I just look back here to the exact phrasing that log messages, errors, and these things should go to the standard error, and these should not be fed into the next command. And again, I would like to go back to our two different types of users, the humans and the various tools, that having some kind of output that is so like a success message or even a failure message, that is very valuable for a human who is sitting there and wants to see what happens. But of course we don't want it to that command, and for that this standard input, standard out, standard error distinction is a very good tool to do. And I just wanna jump back a bit to this util and show that in the for each with setting the standard error to true, that is the way how we can create a standard error console and then write to there. And one thing which surprised me, and I would like to show it for this reason, is that for the tests we use this CLI runner, which is also provided by Typer. And here by default the standard out and standard error are mixed together. So if we want to have separate assertions in the tests for standard out and standard error, then you have to provide this mixed stdr false when you create the CLI runner instance. I think that it's more logical with to test the two things separately, but yes, this is how it works. And and one thing I also want to point out that in the tests, in the tests we again see that this non-interactive possibility is very valuable, because testing the prompts is much more complicated, and if you just want to have a quick verification that, okay, did we manage to create something or no, it's with these options you have much more flexibility there. So with that in mind, the next exercise would be to please add some more test cases, some more test cases to this create command, and come up with some ideas what else would be worth testing. So let's say, let's have 5 minutes for this. So what kind of test cases have you come up with? And
I found that if you try to repeat a short name that already exists in the database, it screams at you.
it screams at you, okay. That's a good one. Some other ideas?
Edit a test that tries to pass you the string for the duration.
Mm-hmm.
Fails.
It fails, okay. Some other points? So those are two very good ideas. One thing I think is perhaps often overseen is that it might make sense to add some more success test cases. So if we look at here, it is already a parameterized test, but it has only one value. So I would and the only test case which we test here now is that we provide the short name. This is the only required field and nothing else, which is great. But it might absolutely make sense to provide some more valid data and try to figure out and try to check that, okay, for example, what happens if I provide both the title and the short name? Is that also possible? So if we just go there and no. Okay, sorry. Oh, I'm missing a comma here. Unhashable type list. Come on. Yes? Sorry? Oh, I think, yes, I have done the parameterizing wrong. You are absolutely right. Thanks a lot. And now? Sorry? Does it expect?
The tuple that has comma separated list nested.
I'm not sure about that, I think. Yes, so this is the right syntax that for the test cases, this should be in tuples, and then the parameters of invoke should go into the list. And regarding the invoke, I would like to point out one more funny behavior, which is, for example, if we look at this test. So this is a test case for the view command, and it tests that what happens if we create something with an already existing short name. And so not create, sorry. So if we view something with an existing ID, that is what I saw, then then here it is very important to have this str before the ID, because all the parameters provided to this invoke needs to be strings. So if I just provide the ID as an integer, then it will fail, even if that itself is a valid command. So yes, but so this is one of the things which surprised me with the invoke, and I wanted to mention it. I am wondering whether you have other tips, ideas about this command line testing module. And yes? Oh, sorry. So, and then I just wanted to get back to our create tests, and the 2 points which were mentioned were both very, very good points. So so one thing was that if we try to create something with the very same ID, with the very same short name which we have just created, then it complains. And the other one was that, okay, for the duration we shouldn't input a text, it should be a number. And my next question to both of these would be why? Where is that configured? So where in this code can, not in the tests, but where in the production code are these things configured? In the models, yes. That's a very good point. So we mentioned the duration total seconds. And yes, here this is just configured just with the data type, so nothing special, so to say. And where is this configured that that we can't create a talk with an already existing short name? Sorry? Yes, exactly. So there we have this function to initialize the database, and here we also create a unique index for the short name, which leads me to our next topic, this short name. What is the function of this? So why do we have that? Because yes, the title and the duration, these are really real properties of the talk, that the talk usually has a title and yes. So if we go and list this with ls, then we see only the short name. Where else? So what else is the function? So why is it better than the title, or better? So obviously it's not better, but why do we have it if we have a title anyway? And hopefully we wouldn't have too many talks with the same title. Yes? Sorry, I haven't heard that.
It's a human readable identifier, which means we can also use it as part of automation, but it's more, for humans it's better than 1, 2, 3, 4. Title contains spaces.
Yes, so I am trying to summarize, please correct me, so that it is human readable. That's a very big advantage of it. And it is, but it can be also used by tools, also because of this convention that we use hyphens in it, and that it's for humans perhaps easier to read than just a numeric identifier. Yes?
I actually passed the quoted string to the short name with spaces, and it accepted that.
It accepted, yes. So there is no validation for it. That's a good point. So if we look at the models, it only just says the length. But exactly the purpose of this identifier is, as you said, that it's human readable, and but it can be also processed by tools. And if we now, I just want to show that it's not only the ls which uses it, but so when we try out this view command, let's just see the help first, what it says. So here we need to provide an identifier for the view, and this identifier can be the ID or the short name. And So if I say 1, or if I say instead Python syntactic sugar, it has exactly the same result. And this should have that advantage that instead of, so now with this example it's a bit funny because yes, we need numbers like 1 and 2. Obviously we can, so it's easier to keep them in mind, but if you have a significantly bigger numbers and more complex identifiers, it's nice to have something human readable additionally, and the quick way to refer to them, which is probably more convenient than using the whole title. Okay. My next question is about this view command that, as we have seen, it has both arguments and options. And what do you think about that design? And for the create, we had only the options. So what are your thoughts on that? When should we use arguments? When should we use options? Yeah. Yes, arguments are mandatory.
Seems like the options here are used to control the output, whereas the arguments were used for input.
Well, the options here for that command, they are all for controlling output. I completely agree. If we look at the other command create, here we chose to have options for the input as well, which is one of the, so I'm not saying it has to be that way all the time, but we chose. So what might be a reason for this setup, or generally what are, so when is an option and when is an argument to be preferred?
When you're doing like just one thing with it, it's nice, it's less typing
Mm-hmm.
than about a flag. Top create. Arguably you could make the name of the top positional view and then have all the other fields.
Yes, that's, I think that the typer documentation even has it that arguments are usually mandatory. There is a way in typer to define optional arguments. I would say you have to have a very strong reason to do it, because it's really against all the conventions of having arguments as optional. And then the other, So the other thing is that with the options, they are usually optional, but for example, in that case, with the create, I decided to have the short name also as option for 2 reasons. And one is to be consistent with the other fields, because it might be a bit confusing if you enter this in one way and the others another way. The second thing is that it is more explicit, because that way I have to, so to say, type the option name as well. It's more visible what it does. And then there is a third reason, which is related to this, which is not relevant for this very small example, but related to this being explicit, that let's assume that it's not it's a more complex model with 3 mandatory string fields. In that case, I would definitely go for 3 options instead of arguments, because probably there is no intuitive order of those 3 mandatory arguments. So, so my I would say on this would be that yes, if we have only one real parameter and it's fairly easy to guess. So let's say intuitive, somebody used this word, what this thing might be, then it's probably fine as an argument. And if we have more things, especially more things with a similar role, like for the create, then it's better to go for options. And I am curious what you think about this setup for the identifier, so for the view that it accepts both the numeric ID and this other short name. So what are the pros and cons of this design?
Well,
Yes?
if the short name has spaces, then it becomes difficult for the shell to parse. The other is that you could imagine, talk view having multiple identifiers. Like you say identifier 4, 7, and 3, and you would show all of them. So that would be an example where you could have more than one argument that makes sense. So it seems to me that those two things kind of add confusion, and so I guess with the short name at the top, supposedly you have to put it in quotes.
Yes.
If it has a space, right?
If it has a space, you have to put it into quotes. Another idea would be that adding a validation that we only allow some specific format for this short name. That.
I mean, and if you had a short name that was an integer, if the name of the video
42.
oh, yeah, exactly. Sometimes the name of a video is a number, and it's not clear.
Yes, I mean, especially in that case, that short name is something constructed by us. We could theoretically add it would probably really make sense to add another validation that it shouldn't be just an integer, because that really leads to confusion. That's a very good point. I haven't thought about that. And yes, that thing with the multiple arguments, it's possible. So Typer definitely supports it. With the view, I would be, I don't know, I associate view with exactly one, but it might be just, so I don't have a strong opinion on it, so to say. Yes, I'm just, okay. So I think it's now time for another break, if you leave it that. Should we meet at 11:16? Cool. And thanks a lot for the great the participation. What I planned was to look at the command which we haven't discussed, at least not in depth so far. And this one is the ls command, which right now only displays this. And first question is yes.
Why ls? That assumes everyone is familiar with ls.
Awesome question. That would have been later on the agenda, but let's discuss it now. So what do you think? What are, so now we also see all these various names on the screen. What do you think about this naming? Yes?
Is there an alias to like list or something more?
Right now there isn't. I think it is possible to add it. That's a very good point, that having an alias for something more expressive is a good idea. What else?
I feel like it's okay to use a short name if it's something that's like kind of universally known. And I feel like if someone's using a CLI, they probably know what ls is. So it's like,
Yes. That's a good, very good point about conventions and whatever. So I assumed that ls is something which is known. That's why I picked it. But it's a good question, how universally it is known. And again, one question is who the audience is of the specific application. And one thing which CLIG also mentions at multiple places, that especially if it is, so So that, especially if a tool is meant for people who are perhaps not that often use other command line tools, it might make sense to go for the longer and more expressive options, so to say. And it doesn't exclude, that was a very good point, that we can always have aliases for multiple different civilities. There was one more. You also had your hands up, I think.
It only shows the short name and the ID, but not all the other fields. I'm showing you the table. There are options to they only show the IDs or show the entire objects. List all the objects.
Yes. That's actually also a very good point, that it's not as much about naming, but about what the output is, which will be our next topic. So if we look at, for example, create, it has all the various fields as an option. For relation, it makes sense, but in a similar manner, we could have options for ls as well. So like just providing every single field and then having and then showing only those which are there, which are provided. Here I would like to mention that it's a bit dangerous, depending on what your application is, because I think even with that kind of so this kind of model, if I really show all the various fields, and assuming they are filled, of course, but if I really show all of them, it might be a bit too long, might get a bit too long. But actually, the next exercise, which I want to ask you to do, is a bit less ambitious than showing all the various fields and making it configurable, but instead just adding the title to the output. So, how did it go? And where did we add and what? Yes?
I don't know if it was another field, but I think it used to like
107. Just a sec. Sorry? Yes, exactly. So, very first thing perhaps to point out about this. Yes, there was.
I was just saying the max size of each column, you probably need to modify that to get it.
Yes, exactly. So there was a central, but the first thing I want to point out that there were two. So this ls command also has some options for. Oh, sorry. So for in which format to show, and the way how the JSON was implemented, it already showed everything. But for the default and for the plain ways, we had to. So that's where we wanted to add the title. Okay, so let's start perhaps with the easier one, which is. Which one was the easier, if you did both? Sorry? The second one, yes. Okay. And why? So how did you approach that? Exactly. So there was one more column to be added to this title, and then in the row adding the item title, and we are ready. And these are actually the two big advantages of the library Rich, which provides this table command, and also, by the way, for the markdown, which we see in the view command. And so these are the two big advantages. One of them is that it looks very nice, and the second one is that it's relatively easy to add, because we just add one more column and title, and everything is, and Rich figures out everything around spacing and that. What was to do with the other part, with the plane? I already heard something about column width. So yes, so here in this line we define what we guess, because it's more or less a guess how long these things will be. So with that way we add a new column. So no, sorry, not a new column, but just a new bit. And then when we actually print the results, here we had to add the new a further item, so for each line. And I tried to follow the same pattern as for the short name. And I am wondering why is this or empty string necessary? Yes, exactly, because it's optional, and if we just add it into without any adjustment, it reads an error. So this is also something with the built-in table component. It's fairly straightforward. So with the rich table component, it is all straightforward, and it takes care of it with our. So that way we need to provide it ourselves. My question is that if it is so easy and nice to create the output above, why did I bother creating this ugly thing below that? Sorry, I didn't hear it.
I'm saying, is that to show the alternative that is painful and we should be using each one?
No, I like the second one better, but I would even remove the bars between. But anyway, this is way easier to parse.
Yes, I like both answers, although I am not so. So yes, I agree that that Rich is a cool tool for this, but the reason was that this is the one which is easier to parse, and for example, this could be piped into a command like awk or whatever, and then getting something out, and then parsing this output further with other tools. And this pattern, which one we like better, is as a user or even as a developer, we actually don't necessarily need to choose, and that's why these options are great. That we can say that, okay, by default we pick this one, and then we also provide something less complicated. One thing which I also would like to mention is it is less for the table, but so the more complicated and nicer the default output gets, the more sense it makes to also provide some plain. Because, for example, I had it once with a tool which outputs YAML, and there is a really nice syntax highlighting and everything, which is the default output, but unfortunately it doesn't. Depending on the color settings of your terminal, it works better or not so well. And for this kind of use case, it's really good to provide just a plain option that if something doesn't go as planned, the user always has the opportunity to output it with -- plain. And And my next exercise would be also related to this topic. I would like to ask you to use some command, whichever, to count the numbers, so the talks in this table. And so the goal would be to output 2 at the end in some way. And probably for that we will also use the plain option in some capacity. But please, please take a look at that. Let's say in 5 minutes. ID is guaranteed to be always an integer, yes. So if we look at the both in the model and in the CRUD, it is defined. So now I am curious to hear, which ways have you come up with to get a 2 on the screen? Yes? Okay, cool. So let's just also show. So I'm just repeating if in the mic. So this was a great point, that because the headers are printed to standard error and the rest to standard out, we can use the sorry. Thank you. So, and plain, and we can use the word count -l, which counts the lines, and we get 2. And as you pointed out very well, this is because the headers and the separator are on the standard error. So what else? There was a
Retain the options to display plain results. It first goes and reads off all of the entries that it finds in the database, so that's the result object. I just print the length of that.
Okay. Okay, so you modify the code to print a okay, that is also a good way to do that. What else? Yeah. So what I have come up with was exactly this same solution with word count. And I just want to show that if we just execute word count -l, it counts 6 lines, because in order to construct this nice table, the lot of other things are printed as well. So, and for that reason, this can be used for piping. And the second very important thing, which you pointed out, that in order to make plain compatible with this word count, we also had to do a bit of a trick, and in order for that we said that we are going to so we said that we are going to print a header row to this standard error console, and then everything else to the standard out. And so I just would like to go back to the place where which we have looked at various times today, and it's not a coincidence that sorry. Yes, so here exactly to this command line interface guidelines basics, that this kind of rules like so this one, that being very conscious about what to put to standard out, what to standard error, that might seem a bit so sometimes a bit too strict, but exactly if we follow this, it enables us such capabilities as this one. And one, so,
So I guess I have a question about
yes?
the design decision not to pipe not to send the headers to standard out, because the next program might want the headers. And in a pipeline, you can do like head -2 and or get rid of the headers, but you can't force the headers to go to standard out right now.
Right now, exactly. That's a very good point. How would you mitigate it?
I send the headers to standard out. Also because that's what it looks like. It looks like that output all goes together. So the fact that some of
Mhm.
the table is going to standard error and some to standard out also means you have to worry about flushing buffers as well.
Mm-hmm.
Standard out is always unbuffered. Or I mean, standard error is unbuffered, but standard out is buffered. And, it seems like you're adding. I guess I'd like to go with the principle of least surprise. And I'm
Mhm.
just looking at this and set this to redirect it to a file. I would be surprised if the headers didn't show up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a very good point. I mean, one thing I could imagine to mitigate it is to provide options again. So yet another way that even saying that the header is optional, and in that case, if it's added, then it's added to the standard out. If it isn't added, then we can use word count. So that would be probably a nicer and, I agree, more consistent way than. Yes, so if I understood correctly, you said that we could also configure it in the shell that you get both the standard out and the standard error and everything. I agree with that. I agree with that very good point from that side that this is the principle of least surprise, and if it is, so if I need to manipulate it that way, then it's probably not such a good idea. I mean, in that regard, we can definitely debate how to say the merits of another design decision as well, which we have here. That this header row and separator row are only printed if the standard out is a terminal, and that is how we achieved that. For example, when I go to when I go here and print print plain and then pipe it into the word count, then we don't see the headers at all. So so yes, it is. So I agree that this might be also surprising, and it depends on behavior, and probably in that specific case a better design decision would be to say that okay, a header is optional, and if you want to count, for example, then omit the header. So so the next thing I wanted to briefly show, because we also have a JSON output here, but this is this is really just a very simple thing, so to say, and brief code. And again, that is absolutely because of reach. And here I would like to point out one difference, and this is that this console, so this console from which is provided from Rich. Most of the time, whatever you print, it uses the print method. So for example, we say here that here it prints a table. Then or it can also print just simple messages, but also like when we have the markdown, it is printed like that. And there is the only, so to say, exception when you want to print JSON, then I would then it is printed. Then it is printed as then we need to provide print JSON instead. But that's just a nice. That's just a small distinction. Regarding JSON, I would have another discussion point / question or whatever. And this is we have already discussed that we have the format options, which is coming from the common options module. And here we see that we define it that it is _1 to the -- JSON syntax, and here this isn't called JSON but show JSON instead. Any guesses what was the reason for that? Yes. So the idea was that the module name. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's the point. That with the so in the Python standard library, there is also I'm sorry. So there is also a JSON module, and often, I mean, you don't necessarily need to use it because you can, as you can see, with the there isn't really any conversion or whatever necessary. But even in that case, I wouldn't call a function argument the same way as the standard variable module, because although it's technically allowed, it can just lead to various confusions. And with that, I would like to briefly refer back to the other question, which was that whether this ls should be called list. And in that, so what would be completely possible is to say that here we keep the name as ls, and additionally here, when we define the typer command, then we say that it should have the name list. And in that way, so if you prefer that naming convention, then that is a way to do it. Both names? I don't know. I need to look it up. I assume somehow yes. And another way which you can definitely do is to define a second function and refer the first one. But I guess that there is a faster way for it. So in the next step, I would like to briefly get back to this view output, and let's just quickly see how it is right now. So. Okay, here we even don't have too much data, but what we have are only some fields displayed. And for example, that what would be a possibility that if we have a YouTube video ID, it would be cool to display this as a in that output a link to the link to the YouTube video instead of just the ID, because the ID itself is probably not such a useful info. So that would be the next exercise. Let's say for 10 minutes to figure out a way to display the link to the YouTube video instead of just providing an ID. Showing an ID, sorry. Exactly. So it's probably better if I also just add the talk with really an ID, and then it's easier to see. So it is. So the goal would be that here, instead of or besides, whatever you prefer, the video ID, we also would like to see a link where you can actually watch this video. So are there any solution ideas?
What I did was probably a bit hacky. I modified the getPlane function model.py and just constructed a URL for YouTube video that prepares https://the video.
Mm-hmm. So this one was modifying the getPlane function and then displaying and then constructing the URL there. Okay. How that sounds good. And any other ideas? Yes. Sorry, again.
So that's I added a property to the talk model that will get all the logic to concatenate the URL https://youtube.com/BID if there is a YouTube ID or return nothing, and then I modify the get markdown or get plain to use that property.
So yeah, so the second solution was adding a new property to the model and then modify and then using that in the get markdown and get plain. I show a third very similar option. Instead of adding a new property, this one added added a new function to the to this model. And then similarly, we can add it to the model like that. And what I would like to point out is that here, if we add it to the Markdown, then we can also use Markdown syntax, and so Markdown link syntax, and we can actually get a link. So sorry. So I think that this is typically one of those features of rich and that output that it can be super practical for a human, and of course for the purpose of working together with other tools, it's very practical to have some other options as well. So the next exercise, would be, I would like to let us skip it because we are a bit moving towards lunchtime. But I just want to ask in the round that if we wanted to add more functionality to actually open this and watch the video, how would you approach that? Or what are the ways for that? Yes, so we could add the output to the ls command, that's true. And what I was wondering is that one possibility would be to write a brand new command, for example, which then opens a browser and really looks it. Or instead of writing a brand new command, another option would be to take the view command and add an option there and open it. And this is, for example, so the reason why I was considering this exercise, because I think that here, that is typical thing where there isn't a better or worse solution. Both are at least completely fine at adding a new command or adding an option to an existing command. Both achieve it quite well. So, before we close this session, I wanted to ask, so first of all, I would like to thank you all for coming and for the participation. So I have learned a lot, and it has been very cool to get this lots of various answers. And for the summary, I wanted to ask you to collect some topics which have popped up again and again, whatever different features and things we were trying to add or fix. What have been our recurring topics this morning? Yes. Well, the CLI guide itself, that's a good point. Which parts of the CLI guide have we come back again and again? That's what I would mean. Yeah. So, but yes, it's probably.
Also spoken quite a bit about how to display output versus tools can faster and efficiently for humans and also.
Sorry, a bit louder, please.
Yes, I said we've spoken quite a bit about where to send each output from your CLI applications so that humans can see them and tweet what your output means, but also other tools can take that output and do something further with it.
Yes, exactly. So, if so we mentioned one topic that where to send the output was one big topic. So standard out versus standard error, and in what format was a second one. And if I would, so I would like to summarize perhaps our takeaways in 5 major points. The first one is how to get started, and this is one of those basics, and the guidelines recommend use one framework, where for this example we picked Typer. Besides the framework, I would also really recommend Cookie Cutter, because as we have seen, there are lots of things which really repeat themselves across many applications. So so for how to get started, have a Cookie Cutter perhaps, and definitely have a command line framework. Then this have a very explicit output, have a very explicit way of signaling whether something was successful or not. This is something which have surprised me more often than I expected with various debugging and error searching, that, oh yeah, the error happened 3 commands earlier. And for that, so the major way is the exit code, and then additionally the standard out and using the standard error. Yes?
In terms of usability, how would you rate the different CLI libraries, argument passers that are recommended for Python?
Yeah?
I've been diving into Typer because this is the first I've heard of it. And it looks like it's, a slightly nicer click because it uses click underneath. But it seems like the main reason Typer exists is for command line completion. So if you don't need command line completion, or you don't want it, because Typer will automatically add that install completion for you. And I couldn't see where I could disable that.
I have no idea where to disable it. That's something I haven't tried so far. But yes, so to both questions. So the first question was how I compare these three libraries, and the second one was a remark that yes, Typer is based on click. So my personal preference is Typer, but it's of course a question of taste also. And yes, this is true that Typer is based on click in that way that even click is its major dependency. And two things which so it adds completion, and additionally it also adds the type hint and the type checking based on Python type hints. And the syntax is for me a little bit, so to say, so less verbose, because with click you also need to define all the various options additionally as an annotation, and with Typer you can it's enough to define them as a function argument, and then it automatically can create the options based on it. I have to admit, I have never tried this kind of common options, and repeated options between various commands. I have never tried this in click. If I had to guess, I would guess that it works in click as well, but this is something where it's very practical that for Typer it's just a function argument and you can add it.
Do you ever find any use cases where you say maybe a very simple tool with minimal options that you would still go back to add?
I have used once RPS that was for an end-to-end testing, and there I wasn't allowed to install any additional dependencies, and that's why I picked what was built in the Python standard library. Otherwise, I would almost always pick some framework, and I would say that with how Typer and also click is set up, and especially if you find a cookie cutter, so this one which we used is a quite specialized one, so to say, because the goal was to provide a lot of stuff for this workshop, but there are many more bare-bone cookie cutters, but they still contain the basic infrastructure of a command line, so I would go with that, but I'm curious what are the other ideas. When is ArcParse, for example, a better fit? What are the use cases? Yes? Yeah, it's again?
No, I was going to say developers also design nice things.
It's definitely a lot of also question of personal preference, and again, I think that one reason why people often choose more simple tools and then perhaps stick to it even too long when the application lives longer than expected, is because the original setup feels easier. And that's one of the reasons why I really like Cookie Cutter, because it removes exactly this burden of original setup of the starting setup. And I think that's a very good point. So yes. So to yep. Yeah. No.
Do you have favorite cookie cutter templates that you suggest we go have a look at?
Oh, I think on the Cookie Cutter, not on the main side, but on the GitHub repo, there are some listed, and there is definitely some list of plenty of Cookie Cutters. I will send the link after the up. Yeah. So yes, what I wanted to point out again is this kind of so where we send the output and in what format we send it. These are two things where regarding the where there are some, so to say, rules, and regarding the what I really like this idea from TLG that this provide this flexibility, that provide different options. And if you want nice and for human pleasant output, then I really recommend the various capabilities of the rich library. And then one topic which we also looked at in more detail is interactivity. And again, here this pattern with the interactive flag, I think that's very useful in many different command line use cases. And then one thing which this guy doesn't discuss, because it's less about CLI design, it's more about the development work, is the testing. And that's also one more reason why I think it's good to start with a template, because that already generates like 20 tests for you. Then it's much easier to come up with additional test cases. So I think what you all had great ideas that, okay, what else we should test with the create command. If you are staring at a blank pane, you won't come up with this. You will come up with the very first basic test instead. And if the basic tests are generated, it's much easier to write out. So yeah, so for the tests, and for the tests again, I just want to repeat that the same guidelines apply there as for the other, as for the production code itself, that almost always test the exit code, and it definitely makes sense for test for the standard out and standard error. It might be often enough to just test whether there is anything there, or just parts of the output, but having some kind of verification is very practical. So thanks a lot again for all the all the very great input and discussions, and I hope that you have found this or parts of this useful. And if you, I will send some updates update the GitHub repository later during the conference with that which we have discussed here. And if you have any questions, then please reach out.